Imagine you're at a birthday party, celebrating a loved one's, new career in the military.
Mm-hmm.
The pub is lively, full of laughter chatter,
Yeah.
then a deafening bang.
Yeah.
Everything goes black.
Oh, wow.
This was the chilling reality for many in Britain in 1974, a year marked not just by celebration, but also by political and economic turmoil, and overshadowed by the specter of IRA terrorism.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how 1974 serves as this kind of microcosm of a nation grappling with its identity.
Right.
We've got a historical account and a podcast episode you shared, and both paint this really vivid picture of this tumultuous period.
Yeah, it's like holding a mirror to a society at a crossroads, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And to understand these crossroads, we need to understand the events that shape them. And one event that really stands out for its sheer brutality and the fear it instilled is the Guildford pub bombing.
Absolutely. The bombing of the Horse and Groom pub with 5 lives lost and 68 injured, it really marked a turning point.
Yeah.
It brought the reality of the IRA's mainland campaign into sharp focus, This was no longer a distant conflict, but a threat striking at the heart of everyday life.
Yeah, and the story of Paul Craig, who was celebrating his friend's birthday at the pub, really drives home the human cost of this tragedy.
Yeah.
His life full of promise was snuffed out in an instant. And then the injustice of the Guildford Four, wrongly convicted and imprisoned for 15 years. It adds another layer of tragedy to this event.
It really does. The wrongful convictions highlight the immense pressure on authorities to find anyone to blame.
Right.
It speaks to that climate of fear and uncertainty that gripped the nation.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a local event. It sent shockwaves through the entire country.
And all of this was happening just days before the second general election of that year.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
The country was already on edge, facing economic woes and a sense of political helplessness. No wonder the Times described the mood as one of public uncertainty and depression.
You had Harold Wilson's Labor Party and a minority government desperately seeking a stronger mandate.
Right.
Their position was precarious, lacking full control of Parliament, which made governing extremely difficult.
Yeah, it sounds like a political thriller waiting to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Wilson himself seemed like a character straight out of a drama with behind-the-scenes power struggles and last-minute policy shifts.
Right.
And then there was Ted Heath and the Conservatives, hungry to regain power after their surprise defeat earlier that year.
Yeah, Heath was attempting to rebrand himself,
Okay.
projecting an image of stability and unity. He advocated for a national unity coalition government, hoping to appeal to voters tired of political infighting and seeking a steady hand during turbulent times.
It's interesting how politicians try to adapt their image to the prevailing mood, isn't
No,
it?
for sure.
But then you had this rising star in the Conservative Party, Margaret Thatcher, who offered something quite different.
Yes.
She proposed capping mortgage rates for homeowners at 9.5%.
Right.
A bold move aimed at appealing to those struggling with a rising cost of living.
Thatcher's policy, while popular with some, also attracted criticism, even from those who would later become her ardent supporters. They saw it as too interventionist, a departure from the free market principles she would later champion.
Interesting.
It's a fascinating glimpse into the evolution of her political thinking.
So you've got this backdrop of anxiety and uncertainty, and then you throw in an election with these larger-than-life personalities.
Yeah.
It must have been quite a spectacle.
It was in a way, but there was also a palpable sense of voter fatigue.
Right.
This was the 4th time Wilson and Heath were facing off.
Wow.
And the public was growing weary of the same old faces and the same old arguments.
Yeah.
There was a yearning for something new, a solution to the mounting problems facing the nation.
And speaking of something new, let's not forget Jeremy Thorpe and the Liberal Party.
Oh, yes.
Their attempt to shake things up with a nationwide hovercraft tour certainly fits that bill.
The Hovingcrafts at the time were seen as symbols of innovation and progress.
Right.
A glimpse into a more technologically advanced future.
Uh-huh. Thorpe's intention was clear project, an image of a forward-thinking party embracing modernity. Unfortunately, the execution was less than ideal.
To put it mildly, that disastrous incident in Sidmouth, with the hovercraft being wrecked by waves, became a rather unfortunate metaphor for the party's struggles to gain real traction.
Yes.
It seemed to embody the sense of decline that many associated with Britain at the time.
The election results, however, painted a very different picture.
Okay.
Despite the lack of excitement and the general sense of disillusionment, the stakes were high. And in a nail-biting finish, Wilson's Labor Party managed to secure victory albeit with a slim majority of just 3 seats.
A win is a win, but a 3-seat majority doesn't exactly scream stability, does it?
No, it doesn't.
And then you factor in the economic storm brewing, soaring inflation, a looming balance of payments crisis.
Yeah.
It's like they were handed a poison chalice.
Absolutely. The economic situation was dire.
Yeah.
To give you an idea of just how bad things were, the country was essentially spending more abroad than it was earning.
This put immense pressure on the value of the British pound, leading to a loss of confidence in the economy.
It sounds pretty bad.
Even James Callaghan, who would later become prime minister, famously said that if he were a young man, he'd emigrate.
Really?
And he wasn't alone in that sentiment. Emigration from Britain was on the rise, with many, particularly young people, seeking a brighter future elsewhere.
It's got to be bad if Callahan's saying that.
It was a stark reflection of the pessimism and lack of opportunity that many felt.
Yeah.
It got to the point where countries like New Zealand and Australia had to impose restrictions to control the influx of British migrants.
Imagine feeling so hopeless about your own country's future that you'd pack up and leave everything behind.
Yeah.
It paints a rather bleak picture, doesn't it?
It does.
But, as we'll see, things were about to get even more complicated.
Indeed. Just weeks after the election, another tragedy would strike, further deepening the sense of crisis engulfing Britain. The Birmingham pub bombings would leave an indelible scar on the nation's psyche and force the country to confront some very uncomfortable truths about itself.
Well, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and talk about that right after this. We ended the last part of our deep dive talking about a nation grappling with uncertainty and economic woes.
Yeah.
But just as the dust was settling from the election, another tragedy struck one that would leave a deep wound on the nation's soul: the Birmingham pub bombings.
It's hard to overstate the impact of this event. On a seemingly ordinary Thursday evening, 2 bombs ripped through crowded pubs in the heart of Birmingham.
Right.
A third unexploded bomb was later discovered in a nearby wine bar.
Oh, wow.
A chilling reminder of the indiscriminate nature of the attack.
It's difficult to even imagine the horror of that night. The eyewitness accounts are truly harrowing. One fireman described seeing a writhing, screaming torso, a testament to the sheer brutality of the blasts.
Yeah. 21 lives were lost that night, and nearly 200 people were injured, many with life-altering injuries. The scale of the attack and the targeting of civilians in a place meant for relaxation and community sent shockwaves throughout Britain.
It's as if the sense of security, that feeling of safety in everyday life, was shattered. This wasn't a conflict confined to Northern Ireland anymore. It was a threat that could strike anyone, anywhere.
The IRA claimed responsibility for the bombings, stating they had given warnings, but the warnings were inadequate and far too late to allow for any meaningful evacuation.
Right.
The inadequacy of these warnings, coupled with the sheer scale of the devastation, fueled public anger and a desire for justice.
It's understandable that in the aftermath of such a horrific event, there would be immense pressure to find those responsible.
Oh, absolutely.
But as we know, that pressure can sometimes lead to tragic mistakes. The wrongful conviction of the Birmingham Six is a stark example of this.
Absolutely. 6 Irishmen living in Birmingham were wrongly convicted of the bombings, spending 16 agonizing years behind bars before their convictions were finally overturned.
Yeah. It's a case that exposed deep flaws within the British legal system, highlighting how prejudice and fear can undermine the pursuit of justice.
It's a reminder that even in the face of tragedy and a desire for swift answers, the principles of due process and fair trial must be upheld.
Indeed, the Birmingham Six case serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the rush to judgment can have devastating consequences. It also underscores the enduring impact of these events, the scars that remain long after the headlines fade.
So while the nation was grappling with the fear of terrorism and the fallout from the Birmingham bombings, the underlying economic crisis continued to loom large.
Right.
We touched upon this earlier, but it's important to delve deeper into the challenges facing Britain at the time.
Right, so let's revisit the economic landscape of 1974. Inflation was spiraling out of control, reaching over 20% at certain points. To put that into perspective, imagine the cost of everyday goods increasing by 20% in a single year.
Wow.
The impact on people's lives and their ability to make ends meet would be devastating.
It sounds like a recipe for social unrest and discontent. Absolutely. And alongside runaway inflation, Britain was also facing a balance of payments crisis. Remember, this essentially meant that the country was spending more money abroad than it was earning, putting immense pressure on the value of the British pound.
It seems like they were caught between a rock and a hard place. What options did they have to address these economic woes?
Well, there were 2 main schools of thought emerging at the time. On one hand, you had figures like Tony Benn advocating for a more socialist approach, what some termed a siege economy.
A siege economy.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty dramatic. What did that entail exactly?
Benn's vision involved significant government intervention in the economy. He believed in nationalizing key industries, bringing them under state control, and implementing stricter controls on imports and exports. Essentially, he argued for a more self-sufficient economic model, less reliant on international trade and finance.
It sounds like a radical departure from the economic policies of the time.
It was. And it was a vision that sparked heated debate. Supporters argued that it was necessary to protect British jobs and industries from the forces of globalization. They believed that a more controlled economy would lead to greater stability and fairness.
But I imagine there were strong arguments against this approach as well.
Indeed, critics argued that Benn's vision was unrealistic and potentially disastrous. They feared it would lead to economic stagnation, shortages, and a decline in living standards. They also pointed to the potential for government inefficiency and corruption in managing such a complex system.
So on one side, you had those advocating for a more controlled, socialist-leaning approach, and on the other,
side, you had figures like Margaret Thatcher, who were increasingly convinced that the only way forward was through free market reforms.
this is where the seeds of Thatcherism were sown, isn't it?
Yes.
The ideas that would come to define her premiership and have a lasting impact on British society.
Precisely. Thatcher and her supporters believed that the solution to Britain's economic woes lay in deregulation, privatization, and a reduction in the power of trade unions. They argued that by freeing up the market, unleashing entrepreneurial spirit, and encouraging competition, Britain could restore its economic vitality.
It was a vision that appealed to those who felt the government had become too involved in the economy, stifling innovation and creating a culture of dependency. But it was also a vision that carried risks, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Free market reforms, while potentially beneficial in the long run, often involve short-term pain. Deregulation can lead to job losses as companies face increased competition. Privatization can lead to higher prices for consumers as companies seek to maximize profits. And reducing the power of trade unions can leave workers more vulnerable to exploitation.
So Britain was facing a stark choice, with each path carrying its own set of challenges and potential consequences. It's a dilemma that resonates even today as we grapple with our own economic uncertainties and the role of government in managing those uncertainties.
It's a timeless debate, isn't it? The tension between intervention and free markets, the balance between individual liberty and collective well-being. And as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, the political landscape was about to undergo a seismic shift that would set Britain firmly on the path towards Thatcherism and the embrace of free market economics.
It's as if the events of 1974, the bombings, the elections, the economic crisis, all converged to create a tipping point, a moment where the nation was forced to choose a new direction. We left off discussing the economic crossroads facing Britain in 1974, a nation grappling with soaring inflation, a balance of payments crisis, and a fundamental debate about the role of government in addressing these challenges.
It was a pivotal moment, a time of intense ideological struggle between those advocating for a more socialist approach, like Tony Benn with his siege economy model, and those championing free market reforms, like the emerging figure of Margaret Thatcher.
And as we're about to see, this clash of ideas wasn't just happening in academic circles or parliamentary debates. It was playing out in the very heart of the Conservative Party, leading to a dramatic shift in leadership that would have profound consequences for Britain's future.
Yeah, let's talk about Ted Heath. After 3 election defeats, including 2 in a single year, his leadership was hanging by a thread.
It's interesting how some leaders, even in the face of defeat, cling to power. Was this a matter of pride, a refusal to admit defeat, or a genuine belief that he still had something to offer?
It's likely a combination of factors. Heath was a complex figure, a man of conviction who believed in his vision for Britain. Stepping down would have been an admission of failure, a rejection of the path he'd charted for the country.
But there comes a point when even the most stubborn leader must recognize the need for change, especially when the calls for that change are coming from within their own party. Is that what happened with Heath?
Precisely. The Conservative Party was deeply divided. Many within its ranks were looking for a fresh start, someone who could offer a clear alternative to the Labour Party and articulate a new vision for Britain. Enter Keith Joseph, a figure who seemed to embody those aspirations.
Joseph was nicknamed the Mad Monk, which suggests a rather intense and perhaps unconventional personality. What was it about him that made him a potential challenger to Heath?
Joseph was known for his intellect and his unwavering commitment to conservative principles. He had undergone a significant ideological shift toward free market economics, becoming a vocal critic of government intervention and a champion of individual initiative.
So he was advocating for many of the same ideas that would later become synonymous with Thatcherism, deregulation, privatization, a smaller role for the state.
Exactly. Joseph believed that Britain's economic decline was rooted in excessive government control, stifling innovation, and creating a culture of dependency. He argued passionately for a return to free market principles, believing they held the key to unleashing Britain's economic potential.
His ideas clearly resonated with a segment of the Conservative Party, those who were disillusioned with the Heath era and yearning for a more radical approach. It sounds like he was well-positioned to challenge Heath for the leadership.
He was, and in fact, Margaret Thatcher was initially a key supporter of Joseph's potential candidacy. She shared his belief in the power of free markets and saw him as someone who could lead the party in a new direction.
But then there was that infamous speech in Birmingham, the one that ultimately derailed his ambitions. What happened?
In an attempt to address the issue of poverty, Joseph made some deeply insensitive remarks about working-class mothers and the need to limit family size. His comments were widely condemned as offensive and even suggestive of eugenics.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can stumble when it comes to sensitive social issues. It seems like his attempt to address a complex problem backfired spectacularly.
It did. The backlash was swift and severe. Joseph realized the gravity of his error and, recognizing the damage it had done to his reputation, withdrew from the leadership race.
So Joseph's fall from grace created a void, a vacuum at the top of the Conservative Party. Is this where Thatcher sought her opportunity?
Precisely. While Joseph lacked the charisma and political savvy to navigate the complexities of a leadership bid, Thatcher possessed those qualities in abundance. She saw a chance to step into the void and offer the Conservative Party and the country a radically different path forward.
It's fascinating how unforeseen events can reshape the course of history. A single speech, a moment of misjudgment, can create an opening for someone else to seize the moment.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Thatcher did.
On November 21, 1974, Margaret Thatcher announced her candidacy for the leadership of the Conservative Party. It was a bold move considering her relatively junior status within the party and the fact that many still viewed her as an outsider.
Even her own husband Dennis expressed doubts about her chances of winning, and Ted Heath, still harboring resentment over his forced departure, predicted her defeat. But Thatcher, as we know, was never one to shy away from a challenge.
She was a woman of conviction, driven by a deep belief in her ideas and a steely determination to succeed. Her candidacy marked the beginning of a new era in British politics, one that would see her rise to become the country's first female prime minister and one of the most influential figures of the 20th century.
And with that, dear listener, our deep dive into 1974 Britain comes to an end. It was a year of turmoil and transformation, a year that laid bare the deep divisions within society and the challenges of navigating a world in flux.
We've explored the impact of terrorism, the complexities of political maneuvering, and the weight of economic uncertainty. We've witnessed the fall of one leader and the rise of another, setting the stage for a dramatic shift in Britain's political and economic landscape.
It's a reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and events. It's a tapestry woven from the choices, struggles, and aspirations of real people. By understanding the past, we can gain valuable insights into the challenges we face in the present and the possibilities that lie ahead.
So as you reflect on the events of 1974, consider the echoes of those events in our own time. How do we confront the threats to our security while upholding the values of justice and fairness? How do we navigate the complexities of a globalized economy while ensuring the well-being of our citizens? And how do we find the leadership and the courage to make difficult choices in the face of uncertainty?
These are questions that continue to resonate today, reminding us that the past is never truly past. It informs our present and shapes our future. Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery. Be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more insightful explorations of the past and its enduring relevance to the present. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.